What is going on, you guys? Welcome back to another Swift video. In today's video, we're going to be talking about something that has been requested a ton by all of you, and of course, that is in-app purchases and how to set them up for your app. So here we are on Apple's developer page for in-app purchases, and they've got a whole lot of information here about, what they are, different types, all the things you would care about. I'm sure the majority of you know, in-app purchases to unlock things in your app. Here they've got a visual kind of showing what those screens look like. So we're gonna have a bird's eye overview in this video of how to set them up and fetch them from Apple, the products themselves, present the payments, as well as how to structure your code for a scalable model for presenting in-app purchases. We are going to have follow-up videos because this topic is pretty broad and there's a lot to cover, and we can do it in different segments. So that all said, make sure you destroy the like button as usual. Helps out the videos and channels quite a bit. Every time you hit that like button, it gives me a little bit of a warm feeling inside. So make sure you hit it. And again, if you're a returning viewer, I think 50% of you guys watch these videos consistently and haven't hit subscribe. So please make sure to do that so we can grow this channel together. That all said, I'm going to be quiet and we're going to open up Xcode and jump into some in-app purchases. Quick pause before we get into the video. If you haven't seen it already, I am hard at work putting together iOSacademy.io, a community where all of us iOS engineers can come together, learn how to build some of the top apps like Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram, in addition to interview prep to land some of these iOS roles at top tech companies. So if you're interested in the free and premium content to come, head on over to iOSacademy.io and enter your email address in the waitlist form, and you will be notified as content becomes available. That said, let's get into the video. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started by opening up Xcode and creating a new project. We'll stick with the app template here, and let's go ahead and call this project in-app purchases intro. And let me hit next. Make sure your language was Swift, Lifecycle UI Kit, and Interface Storyboard. Go ahead and save it. And for the purposes of this video, we're not going to actually run it in the simulator. We're going to talk a lot about how in-app purchases are really built under the hood. And then I'm going to have a follow-up video where we'll take a look at using kind of mock data in Xcode to test our in-app purchases in our simulator, which is something new in Xcode 12. So that all being said, let's first and foremost come to our view controller. And what we want to start by doing is importing StoreKit. And essentially, StoreKit is the framework that allows you to interact with the App Store, hence Store. And this is the framework we're going to use to communicate with in-app purchases. So next up, go back to your primary project and select your target here. In the tab bar, you want to come up here to signing and capabilities. And let's see, we want to add a capability. So hit this little plus and search in here for in-app purchases. Go ahead and double click it and you'll see it gets added right here. And you will need to add that there for the purposes of testing later on, but we'll just do it now to start off with. The next thing I'll call out is your bundle ID really matters for in-app purchases. So we have this set up here right now, but we actually test it in the follow-up. We'll take a look at why that matters, but just be aware that you want to have a bundle ID here that is something reasonable that you plan to use. So that all said, back to our view controller. So what's the flow of in-app purchases? Well, we're just going to add it in comments here. So the first thing we want to do is fetch product objects from Apple. And basically our products are all the in-app purchases we have registered with Apple, and they're kind of enumerated based on their product identifier. After that, when a user interacts with like a buy now button, we want to prompt a product payment transaction. After that, we want to observe the transaction state. So these are basically the three key components of interacting with in-app purchases and creating an in-app purchase. So let's actually implement all of this instead of me going on and on. So the first thing we want to do is fetch our products. So let's create a function here called, be a private function called fetch products. And later on in the video, we'll take a look at some good practices of how to structure your code as well. But here in Vue.low, this is called fetch products. And let's see how to fetch a product. So we're going to have a request, and this request is going to be a sk product request, like so. And the constructor takes a set of product identifiers, and those identifiers are nothing more than strings. And these identifiers, generally, people in Apple's portal and App Store Connect will register it along the lines of your bundle identifier. I think it was in-app purchases. It's not the product name. So let's say we have a product to remove ads. So it would be something along the lines of this. And of course, you can pass in multiple here. The next thing we're going to do here is supply a delegate. And this is how we're going to get, when the callback comes back and we get the actual products or a failure. And then we're going to say request.start. So right now you're going to see an error pop up because we don't conform to this delegate yet. So let me actually clean up our code a little bit already. Let me create an extension and put all of our code here in our extension on the Vue controller. And this extension will also conform to sk product request delegate. And if you click into the delegate here, you'll see there's one function in here. And that function is product request did finish with products. So let's go ahead and paste that back in here. And what we're going to basically do is we're going to pull out of the response that the request gives us the products. So we're going to say let products equals response dot products. And for now, instead of having it in this local variable here, let's go ahead and create products on our Vue controller. This will be a private var for products, and it's going to be an array of sk product. And like I was saying, a product basically represents a purchasable product. It has a price associated to it, a title, a description, all that good stuff that you would expect. So this is part one where we need to fetch a product. Now, there is another function in here for a request did finish. So an sk request did finish, rather fill with error. And there's actually two types of requests. So in here, we're going to say guard request is a sk product request. If it's an sk product request and it fails, we want to know about it. So we're just going to put a print in here. We're going to say product fetch request failed. And of course, if it fails, you want to show your user some appropriate UI. We're not going to do that here. The next thing we're going to want to do is create a function called purchase. And purchase is going to take a product. So we're going to basically call this function and say present a purchase. So basically the card that slides up for any in-app purchase, similar to how you download an app in the App Store. And it's going to basically ask the user to confirm if it's free or paid with either Face ID, Touch ID, or their password. And the first thing we're going to want to do in here is say sk payment queue can make payments. And as the name implies here, this static function basically checks if the user can make payments. So AKA has a iTunes store account linked and set up and good to go. The next thing we're going to say is we're going to create a payment. So payment is going to be a sk payment, and you create a payment with a product. So this is slightly misleading. Think of this more so as a payment request. So you're not actually making a payment here. You're creating a payment request to hand to the transaction queue. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to say sk payment queue default, and we're going to want to add a payment. And this should be product, singular, not plural. And before we actually add it, we also want to say sk payment queue defaults. And we want to add an observer. And this observer is going to be, whether we want to, let's see, add. And we want to add a SK payment transaction observer. So this function right here, and we're simply going to do self. An SK payment transaction observer is nothing more than a protocol. And as the name implies, this allows you to observe any new transactions that come into a payment queue and the updated state on it. So the function we're going to want here is updated transactions. And this is where we can handle any of the transactions that come in. So before we do that, let's talk about what this payment queue is. So the way that Apple has architected their in-app purchases under the hood is there's basically a list of transactions in this app-wide or system-wide queue. Think of it literally as a linear queue in which there are transactions. And all you're doing in your app is you're going to add another payment request to that queue, and the system is responsible for prompting that in-app purchase window to pop up. And you have all of these delegates and callbacks to get different states of what's going on and handle appropriately in your app. But that's basically how it works. Fairly straightforward. The system does a lot of heavy lifting for you. So now that we have the updated transactions here, in here, all we need to do is iterate over the transactions. So we're going to say transactions for each. Whoops, if I can spell for each. And in here, $0 now represents the nth transaction. Let's make it simpler and just say transaction in. And we want to switch on the transaction's state. So we're going to say switch transaction dot transaction state. And I believe there's 5 cases here. So the first one is purchasing, which of course implies that the user has started purchasing. The next one is purchased, and this implies that the user has finished purchasing. Then it's restored, that the user restored that in-app purchase, which of course is a requirement for App Store approval for folks that have previously purchased your item. Next is failed, which is self-explanatory as well. Deferred, I believe, is at the top of my head is when a transaction gets added to the queue, but is deferred for presentation. And let's see, I believe that's all 5 of them. So these are the 5 states that you must handle. And let's see if the error goes away. Let's see why this is giving us a warning. So we want to also add, per this warning here, an unknown default in case some other state gets added later on. Basically something unknown occurred. So when we get this function called, we get an array of transactions that have been updated. And the way you want to handle this is depending on how you save it. So let's say we want to save our current product being purchased. So let's say we say product being purchased, and we can say that's product. And we can create this product being purchased variable on our controller. It's an SK product. And we assign it just like that. And here we could say, in our for each statement, we can say guard transaction dot. So a transaction has a bunch of things on it, right? So we're going to say transaction dot payment dot product identifier equals self dot product being purchased dot identifier else continue. So basically what you're saying here is if the transaction in our for loop here is the product that we're purchasing at the moment, we can basically go ahead and continue. The reason it's giving me an error is because a for each is going to iterate every single time, but you could have this be an if statement. But the idea is when we come into each of these cases in the transaction state switch, we want to handle it, right? So when you come in here and you get a purchased event, you need to be explicit about handling that the product for the target transaction in the loop was purchased is not necessarily the payment you queued up here. So the way you would handle this is handle purchase, and you would hand in the transaction dot payment dot product identifier, And this would be a separate function that would take in, of course, the product ID as a string. And based on this, you would handle however you unlock your product in your app, whether it's user defaults, so on and so forth. The takeaway here that I want to really drive home is you need to be very explicit about the transaction payment and what product it's for. And the reason is imagine if you prompt an in-app purchase and your phone dies, right? The payment queue might not clear out to that transaction. So the next time the user opens the app, it might be there. So you don't want to accidentally unlock everything for your user or assume that a payment went through and things like that. You also want to be very aware of handling failure states in a graceful way. Show the user a nice error, let them retry. Don't just assume that this is going to work. There's a reason Apple gives you these states. And of course, you must implement restored as well, which I'll have a separate video on to allow the user to unlock or re-unlock purchases they've made before that are still valid. So that's how in-app purchases work in a nutshell. And if I wanted to basically prompt a purchase, let's say we have fetch products here, and we're able to fetch a product. Let's say here, we say guardlet product is products.first. Else we're going to return if there's not a first product in here, and we can simply say purchase product. And let's refactor our code before we actually wrap up. So this is the bird's eye view of how in-app purchases really work. Let's actually refactor a bit because you can imagine that you might have multiple view controllers in your application where you want to present in-app purchase upsell opportunities to the user, right? So you might have an unlock screen, you might have a discount screen, and implementing this stuff in every single view controller is A, pretty bad practice, but B, it's a lot of redundant code, right? And we're lazy, we don't want to write this much code, so let's create one object to handle all of this for us. So I'm going to create a new file here, and we're going to go ahead and call it IAP manager, so in-app purchase manager. And it's going to be a basic class called the IAP manager. And it's going to be used as a singleton, so we're going to have a shared instance of it, just like that. And we're also going to want to import StoreKit. And all we're going to do now is take all of this code that we wrote down here in this extension, take all of that code, get rid of this fetch products, and also we're going to grab this in just a moment, but go back to your IAP manager and simply paste that stuff in here. Let's come back and grab these properties and go ahead and paste that in here as well. We want to make this fetch products public. And let's see, delegate itself. So we also want to add conformance to all that good stuff here. So IAP manager needs to conform to SK product request delegate, as well as SK payment queue. Let's see, SK transaction, I think. Transaction observer, which is, I always forget what it's called because it's transaction or something along those lines. SK payment transaction observer cannot declare conformance to NS object protocol. So what it's basically complaining about here is we want IAP manager to be inheriting from NS object, just like that. And you should see your errors go away. And if you hit Command B, everything should still be compiling. And the beauty of this is, before we actually see it, let's go ahead and make the function for purchase public as well. The beauty of this is you can go to your app delegate, and in here you can actually prompt your in-app purchase to fetch your products, and you can store them early on in your app's lifecycle to be used wherever. So you would say in-app purchase, in-app purchase manager shared fetch products. And for those of you who don't know, you can hit Command-Shift-O to get this window to search for files across your project. And in your view controller, when you want to prompt a purchase for the user, let's say they hit a button, you can say IAP manager dot shared dot purchase, and you would just need a mechanism to pass in a given product. So you might want to have another function on here, which takes some enum or something and returns a product object. So the point is you have now one class that can handle all of this stuff for you. And the absolute last thing that I will call out in here is when you want to request things like multiple products, passing in these IDs like this is not very scalable and clean. So a great practice that is very popularly used is create an enum on here and have it be have a raw value of string and make it case iterable so we can get all the cases in here. And let's say we have 3 products, so remove ads and unlock more and a tip. We could basically throw our identifiers in here. So instead of passing these in directly like this, if I just go ahead and paste all of these, the beauty of this is now you have a definitive list of the different products that your user can purchase. So when we want to request with all of them, we can simply say product.allCases, and we want to compact map these to each product's raw value. So let's see, it looks like this is complaining. Let's see why it's complaining. I believe it's because it's expecting a set and we're passing an array. So you can actually take this whole thing and wrap it as a set. And the set is just needed so we don't actually request any redundant products because every product should be unique. And this now allows us to essentially figure out a definitive list of products across our whole app. So if we want to show options for the user to unlock, it makes everything nice and clean. The other thing I'll mention, actually, I keep saying my last thing and I keep adding a thing, so this will actually be the last thing. An SK product has a bunch of properties on it which are useful that come back from Apple. Things like localized description, localized title. These are all properties you add in App Store Connect when you register an in-app purchase with Apple. So while you might have strings in your app to show the product, you kind of want to do it. You want to show the information in the user's local description and title, their local price as well. Price locale is things like if you're in Europe, you'll see euros. If you're in the US, you'll see dollars. So things like that. So fetching a product, point being, is pretty important to even render a product purchase moment. And there you have it. That's how in-app purchases are put together in a nutshell. Takeaways are you need to request a product, you need to validate the user can make purchases, add a payment for the product, and then manage the states of that transaction. You should do it in an object that can be used app-wide so you don't duplicate your code. And it's pretty straightforward. So in a follow-up video, like I said, I'll take a look at how to debug these in Xcode and have some mock data, as well as how to register these with Apple. So that all said, thank you so much for watching. If you haven't destroyed the like button already, make sure you hit that like button. As per usual for the video and channel at large, helps out with the algorithm quite a bit. Comment with any questions, suggestions, feedback down below. I love hearing from each and every one of you. Thanks again. I'll catch you guys in the next video.